Hi, and thank you so much for popping by. My name is Dr. Bita Pobaluzi. Do feel free to call me Dr. Baluzi or Dr. Bui. On this clip today, I have artisanal mining on my mind. And the more I read about artisanal mining, the more I see the poverty, the inequality, the desperation in this story, right? And what is interesting is that regions such as sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia are described as two of the poorest regions in the world. And this is where typically artisanal mining is happening because people are being pushed, right? They're being pushed into this sector because they need to survive. They need a better quality of life. They need to be able to feed their children. Whether we like it or not, artisanal mining will be happening because people are poor. This is a sector that, according to research, is being underlooked. This is a sector which, according to research, should be more formalized. This is a sector which, according to research, is showing that we are not maximizing or leveraging on some of the opportunities that are available in our communities, right? And artisanal mining is described as happening on the periphery of large-scale mining. They are happening simultaneously. This is what research shows, right? And artisanal miners frequently live and work in areas that are earmarked for large-scale mining projects, which is why you tend to blur the line between the two. This is exemplified by the presence of illicit networks of middlemen who transport ore from artisanal small-scale mining sites to the large-scale mining companies and processing facilities. So these middlemen, this is why I'm saying somebody is taking advantage of the underserved and marginalized who are conducting this artisanal mining. Somebody powerful is taking advantage of them because there's a connection here between the two. There is a strong connection that shows that artisanal small-scale mining actually feeds into the large-scale mining sectors, okay? So this is why I'm saying I see poverty, inequality in the story of artisanal mining, and I think this is why we need to make more deliberate and concerted efforts to formalize this sector if we are talking about alleviating poverty, which is described as endemic in the case of sub-Saharan Africa and regions such as South Asia. I continue to read the article. The fragmented and opaque nature of the mineral supply chain complicates the traceability of products from upstream suppliers to downstream companies, okay? One of the things that is really hard when you're strategically communicating about any topic is just this idea of synthesizing the data so that the key issues are really coming up as I'm discussing this with you. And let me just refer to my notes to see that I didn't miss any major points about artisanal mining. Right, so yes, women are looking like they are the majority of artisanal miners, specifically in countries such as Equatorial Guinea and Ghana, where 70 to 80% of these people who are mining the gold are women. And then in the case of Zimbabwe and Mali, almost 50% of the women, the populations that are mining this gold are actually also women. So that is a key part of this story that I think is not actually coming up a lot when you look at news coverage, because typically the people who are being caught are men. This is why, for me, this story feels like somebody is taking advantage of the informal mining sector. Somebody more powerful is taking advantage of the underserved, marginalized, and vulnerable populations. Let me tell you why. Because if you look at artisanal mining, these are miners who are mining gold, lithium, sometimes in the case they're mining diamonds, right? And if you look at the markets for these, for the gold, for the lithium, for the diamonds, the people who are mining these materials or these minerals, they do not look like they even know where they're going to sell them. Like, I don't see them as having access to the international markets. I don't see these people as having access to who will buy this gold, who will buy this diamond, who will buy this lithium. It doesn't look like they know where this is going to go. They are basically being instructed to do this at their own health risk, by the way. They are instructed to do this by somebody who is a middleman, right? Somebody who has more means is the one who's saying, go and mine this gold, right? Go and mine this gold and bring it back to me, and I will go and sell it to the more powerful player. So there's a man in the middle here who's taking advantage of this poverty. And another interesting thing about artisanal mining is that it typically happens within the community of subsistence farmers, right? So it means that it's also just another way that communities are trying to survive, basically. And this is why it looks like a good idea to make sure that artisanal miners are formalized. Yeah, so a key factor when it comes to artisanal mining in sub-Saharan African region is the fact that it needs to be formalized, right? It is typically an informal sector, even though it plays such a key role to the economy of sub-Saharan Africa. This sector is not formalized, right? It is not formalized, and that's a missed opportunity. And I say this because as I'm saying that, I'm reminded of the move, the drive to formalize the small, medium enterprises in Botswana. I remember way back when there was a advocacy to formalize the small, medium enterprises in Botswana. And these are people such as Masapi, the women who cook the breakfast, the lunches in the cities for the ones who are working in the offices, right? And that was a very good move, I believe, on the part of whoever was involved, whether it was in the private sector, the government, coming together to agree on this. I remember that this was definitely a deliberate and intentional strategy to make sure that small, medium enterprises are formalized so that Masapi are able to get something, some profit. They're able to get some profit from their businesses. They're able to apply for loans. They're able to formalize their businesses, which I think is a great move. And I think the same can apply in the context of artisanal mining. So this research is showing that when we talk about formalizing the miners in artisanal small-scale mining sector, we are talking about having these miners registered with proper mining titles, right? They need to be able to be registered with proper mining titles. Even in countries where this form of mining is recognized by the law, governments have not made it possible for miners to obtain the necessary permits and licenses. So it looks like even though on one hand they're saying go ahead, on another hand there's a bit of resistance in terms of actually making it possible for miners in this sector to obtain the necessary permits and licenses. Why? Right? I'm asking myself why. That's the question I have here. Why is it harder for them to get these permits, right? But in addition to these permits and licenses, formalization also includes efforts by the mining industry to enact chain of custody and supply chain transparency measures, health, safety, and environmental protections, security and human rights protections, measures that improve access to finance, and requirements to use proper mining techniques, right? So formalizing means we're able to protect these miners in the same way that we are able to protect the miners who are conducting the formal mining in the large-scale mining sector, right? So there's a lot of complexity in the story. As I read more research, the sector's formalization actually speaks to the Sustainable Development Goals, alleviation of poverty, making sure that we reduce this idea of climate change and the impact of climate change on communities in the rural areas, right? So something that is coming up from this research is that, there's going to need to be a change in mindset towards artisanal small-scale mining. That's a key thing because, again, this is a sector that is viewed very negatively when in actual fact, there are major missed opportunities here when we are talking about the populations that are facing this endemic poverty. So they are saying here, this mindset change is unlikely to happen without a wholesale change in mindset towards this artisanal mining or small-scale mining sector. For one, it's going to need a renewed commitment on the part of governments and beyond just rhetoric to support the sector. Two, there's going to be an understanding that the region's extractive industries and development strategies must extend beyond simply promoting the foreign financed large-scale resource extractions, right? So what they're saying in here is that we don't always have to depend predominantly on this large-scale mining, that there's actually a missed opportunity in the artisanal small-scale mining sector, which countries or regions such as sub-Saharan Africa facing so much poverty, and the regions that are described as having, let me see, there's a key word they use here. They say sub-Saharan Africa is a region that is experiencing poverty endemic rural communities. So poverty endemic rural communities. So if we are going to alleviate poverty in our lifetime, can we consider sectors such as artisanal mining? Because this is what the people in the communities are seeing as opportunities, right? And again, we can always work to making sure that these mines are safer, they are more regulated to ensure that while these artisanal miners are doing the surface level mining, because artisanal mining is typically surface level in comparison to the more deep extractions of the diamond, right? Artisanal mining is typically very surface level. And what I think is interesting is that I was reading somewhere that in Sierra Leone, the diamond is also on the surface level, right? Like you can literally walk on top of a diamond as you are going home, literally, like you can literally find a diamond on surface level in Sierra Leone. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the differences between artisanal or small scale mining and of course the large scale mining projects. So key is that artisanal mining, there are lower levels of investment, right? Because it's not formalized, right? There are lower levels of investment and it mainly uses very small machinery. You know, people are just digging, you know, they're not using any large scale machines as we find in the more large scale mining sector. And then number two, operators target alluvial and near surface hard rock deposits. Because they are using such minimal machinery, the people who are conducting the artisanal mining are simply on surface level. They cannot go anywhere as deep as the large scale mining sectors, right? Three, it's very labor intensive, right? And support a wide range of skills. So artisanal mining is very labor intensive because they are literally doing this with their bare hands, right? Compared to the machinery that quickly can extract these diamonds from under the earth, right? And there's a low demand for land and generally small concession sizes. So in the case of artisanal mining, compared to the large-scale mining sectors, artisanal miners use very small land scale. Land, they don't use a lot of land. They use a very small piece of land. And this is why I think when you regulate the sector, you can make sure that they don't deprive the land. You know, they can use the land that is in a sustainable way, right? So that they cannot cause further harm to the environment. So I think that's very key as well. In the case of artisanal mining, it varies, but a large share of the actors involved are based in country, right? So artisanal mining compared to the large scale mining projects is actually the more community orientated mining. This is the mining that is conducted in the country by the peoples from those countries, right? And then lastly, it's mostly informal on the production side. So in other words, it's not fully licensed from production through to the export of these minerals. So I think this is where the key differences. And of course, as we know, for you to work in a large scale mining project, you would have to have absolute skills. You need to be educated, similar to the large scale mining sector. There are also challenges associated with artisanal mining. At least 90% of artisanal miners work informally without the necessary licenses or permits required by law. And one of the reasons this is happening is because artisanal miners are typically people who are also undocumented. They work, or even if the locals are there are a lot of undocumented people also working with the locals in the context of artisanal mining. Securing permits improves the miners' access to services they are unable to access in the informal economy, such as microfinancing these projects, such as getting credit or grants for these projects, and government loan facilities, which in turn place the artisanal miners in a better position to accumulate wealth or make some kind of profit from these projects. In many cases, the artisanal small-scale mining activities are found in regions that are out of reach of regulators, where the institutional presence of the government is weak. So by operating outside of state recognition, it becomes impossible for the government to establish and enforce health and safety standards and regulations, right? So I think this is a very important part of the story, because when you connect to the public health aspect of it, you will see why it is important to protect. Even where mining operations are conducted legally and formally, they still pose significant environmental and socio-economic problems, right? So whether it is artisanal mining or large-scale mining, any mining activity has that potential to pose significant environmental and socio-economic problems. Across the African continent, artisanal mining has been linked to human rights violators, forced labor, crime, and conflict. These issues, compounded with artisanal miners' lack of legal rights, exacerbates the vulnerability and the cycles of poverty and exploitation they face. This is why I was saying at the beginning of this clip, the more I read the articles about artisanal mining happening in sub-Saharan Africa, the more I see the poverty, the inequality, the underserved, the marginalized, the vulnerable, the desperation in the story. And this is why I absolutely agree that we should be having more deliberate and intentional strategies to make sure that these artisanal miners are protected, are legalized or formalized in order to protect them and to protect our public health, right? So this is where I definitely connect with the story of artisanal mining. The study says, when will the benefits that a formalized ASM sector, artisanal small-scale mining sector, can provide be fully realized in sub-Saharan Africa? That is the question. This sector plays a very big role in the economy of sub-Saharan Africa, and specifically in the lives of those who are underserved and marginalized. Okay. Alrighty then, my friend. Thank you so much for popping by. I hope you are having a lovely day where you are, but most importantly, I hope you are having a healthy day wherever you're watching me from. Bye.